settled. And is Nat, y'all ready? Good, okay. Greetings, well thank you so much for coming out. My name is Chris Campany, I'm Executive Director of the Windham Regional Commission. I've been the director for going on my 15th year now, and love it, love Vermont. My wife and I live in Townsend, and tell you a little bit of what I'm going to do is introduce kind of how this project came to be, what it is. I'm going to introduce you to our Associate Director, Sue Weston, who's she's been our staff lead on this, and then I'm going to introduce you to Wayne, who is going to tell you about this process. So what happened is the state provided us with funding to do what was called housing navigation, which they didn't define what that should be, so they left it up to the RPCs. And what I've learned is in Vermont, we create a really challenging context for towns to plan for housing, because we have over 250 municipalities who have the responsibility for planning on this on a town by town by town by town basis. And when you plan for housing, right, you're not just planning for housing, you're planning for the infrastructure to support it. And it's a challenging conversation. Just deciding to have the conversation about housing can be challenging. And then the Planning Commission, you get it, you try to figure out how much do we need, where does it go, what kind of infrastructure are we going to need to support it. And then factoring in things like flood hazard areas and river corridors. It's just a challenging thing to talk about. And so what I thought about was up here in this corner of our region, so the Windham region is 27 towns. There's 23 towns in Windham County, Reedsboro, Searsburg, and Winhall in Bennington County, and Weston and Windsor County. And up in this corner, of course, this was the hardest hit area. It includes more of our towns, but during the flooding in 2023. But also in this area, we had a number of towns looking at, especially the roles of their villages and infrastructure to support retaining existing housing and businesses in their villages, and then also just trying to figure out how do we move forward in this flooding environment, right? So in Londonderry, they'd already developed a master plan for the North Village. They had a housing committee. They got grants to develop 2 distributed wastewater systems, and then they were doing a plan for the South Village. But this has done a lot of planning and updating the town plan and other things. In Jamaica, they were doing an engineering study for a wastewater system there. They're about to complete the 90% design. In Winhall, we had been working with the Planning Commission chair at the time, Marcel, before he passed away. But he mentioned to us, we really want to talk more about getting village center designation for Bonneville and possibly wastewater. So anyway, so we knew there was a conversation happening in the town, no matter what comes out of it, about this kind of development and retention issue. And then in Weston, a little different. They weren't talking about water and wastewater, but they were talking about how does our village survive in this flood environment where you're all dealing with in different ways. But in Weston, the land constraints in their village are even more so than in some of the other villages that we're dealing with. It's all different, but they had formed a committee to look at kind of like, how do we make our village more resilient? And so what we wanted to do was bring together people from the towns, from 4 towns, to have a conversation about what are our housing needs? Does it make sense to think about it all within our own town borders, or does it make sense to, where are the other opportunities in other towns? What are the other towns thinking about? And so just kind of have a broader conversation with the goal of not coming up with this housing plan specifically or regulations or anything, but basically just have you guys talk to each other, talk across town, so that maybe towns will continue to talk to each other, talk about what opportunities there might exist. And it could be that as a result of this, this focus still remains within the town, but maybe you just get some different ideas from hearing what conversations your neighbors in your other towns are having. And I also recognize that, we kind of have created relationships here that may not be as natural. Like when we met in Winhall, really the relationship is probably more directed towards Manchester. Maybe not as much to Jamaica, even though they're right there. But the idea, but I don't think that's a bad thing, because you may create relationships or hear ideas that otherwise you wouldn't. And this is an experiment. If it turns out that this is valuable, we'd like to repeat this elsewhere in the region among clusters of towns that just kind of have these cross-border conversations. And of course, like experiments, it may not work. So, but really appreciate the turnout tonight. A number of you, today, we went around to the 4 different towns and met with some folk and introduced to the team, and I'm going to have Sue introduce them here in just a second. I do want to recognize, I think we have 4 commissioners here tonight. Yep. Raise your hands if you're a Windham Regional Commissioner. Great. Got George Mora from Londonderry, Kathy Edgerly from Windham, Matt Hoffman from Dummerston. We also have some folk from Putney who are just kind of checking out this conversation. And then Cheryl O'Malley, did I butcher your last name? Sorry. From Winhall. So really appreciate our commissioners being here. One thing I will ask you to think about, I've worked in a lot of different planning contexts in other states. This is always a hard discussion because it's always about change. But one of the things I would encourage you to think about is not only what your own needs are right now, but what you think your needs may be into the future, as you may have to downsize, or as your parents may have to downsize, or as your kids may be graduating and wanting to move here or move out of your house, or what it is that you think your neighbors need, what it is that your employees need, what your coworkers need. Because too often, kind of the fear of change can prevent opportunities that then means we ourselves can't live in this place that we love, or the people that we care about, they can't stay here either. And what we're really going to be talking about is housing needs for you, for lack of a better term, let's call it local housing. And when we talk about housing affordability, whatever your situation is, think about what that you're not having to spend, or you or yourself, your parent, whoever, is not having to spend 30% or more of their income in a month on housing. That's really what we're talking about. So keep those things in mind. This is intended to be a low stakes conversation. There may be disagreement, and that's fine. But the idea is just to kind of offer your perspectives. So I'm going to turn it over to Sue.
Thanks, Chris. So as Chris said, I'm the Community Development Lead at the Windham Regional Commission, which means that I run the Brownfields program and am involved in all things housing there. So I've been coordinating this effort, working with the towns and the team to bring them all together. And as Chris mentioned, we are out in the towns today meeting with stakeholders in each of the communities. Our lead contact has been the Planning Commission in each of the towns, and except for here in Londonderry, because there's been this transition happening, so we work more closely with the Housing Committee. But before we move on, I'd be curious to know how many folks there are from each of the towns. So if you're from Londonderry, can you raise your hand? Okay, great. How about Jamaica? Excellent. Winhall? Yes. And Weston? At least one person from Weston. So we have a pretty good mix here tonight. That's great. I also wanted to let you know that all of this information will be available on the Windham Regional Commission's website, on our community development webpage. We will post the slides. The housing needs assessment that you're going to hear about tonight is already up there. We will also be posting links to the recordings, and the final report that the team develops will be up there as well. So you can use that however you like in your communities, but it should be accessible to everyone. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Wayne Fiden, who's going to tell us more about the team. He's from the University of Massachusetts.
Thank you all for coming. So just quickly about me, and then I'm going to introduce the team, and then sort of we're launch into this. So I'm a planning practitioner, work at the University of Massachusetts, directing the Center for Resilient Metro Regions. I actually got my start in Vermont a long time ago, working on statewide, giving technical assistance to like 110 communities about water and wastewater systems. And in fact, I got so frustrated. I love Vermont, but I got so frustrated that we were driving our land use decisions by water and wastewater. And so I was helping people put houses on prime ag land because they couldn't develop elsewhere. So went back to grad school and said that's the wrong thing. I've done a lot of research both in Vermont and then Massachusetts on trying to lower the cost of the water and wastewater system. So I love the system, this program, because clearly a lot of development pressures are being driven by where you can get water, not too much water, but where you can get wastewater. And that's not the way it should be, right? So what we're really going to ask you today is, what are your aspirations? We understand, you don't have to tell us, that wastewater is one of the biggest limiting factors to where you have to, so we know that. But we're sort of going to ignore that for a moment for part of our session to say, what is it you'd want, all things being equal, and then obviously going forward, we try to acknowledge that. So the process that we're doing really is two steps. The first part, which you're going to hear in a little while, is Elizabeth Hammond and Sarah over there did a housing needs assessment, sort of looking, at a few thousand feet up and what's the data out there. So all the things I'm sure you all know, but trying to understand the data behind it. What are the challenges? What we're going to mostly do tonight is ask you to tell us more about the challenges from your perspective. So then she's going to present, then we want to understand what you're looking for. We're then going to spend, the next 2 days, so not a long time, looking at sites, coming up with recommendations. So big picture recommendations. We'll meet back the same room at Thursday at 6 p.m. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Thursday at 6 p.m. the same room, and we're going to tell you our initial recommendation. This is not a plan, right? That can only come from the communities. But it's our job to sort of say, here's what works in other places, here's what we know about your community, what are the regional sharing opportunities, and hopefully get your thinking going. And then 2 months later or so, we're going to issue a written report. That report could be totally a waste of our time and a waste of your time, or incredibly successful, because it's going to go in your hands. So it's really, does this help you move forward in the next process? And when the regional will post the slides from tonight and the report and the slides from 2 days. So that's sort of the big picture. Let me just each ask the team members to come up quickly and introduce themselves.
I'm Peter Flinker. I'm a landscape architect from Northampton, Massachusetts.
I'm Cheryl Morgan. I'm an architect and planner from Birmingham, Alabama.
I'm Judy Barrett. I'm a consulting planner from south of Boston.
I'm Elizabeth Hammond-Infield from UMass Amherst.
And then for the students, just very quickly, name.
I'm Amelia, graduate student at UMass Amherst.
I'm Grace. I'm an undergrad at UMass.
Hi, I'm Nicole. Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a graduate student at UMass.
And then we have two observers today from a U.S. State Department program from Southeast Asia. So they're really interested in this process going forward. One from Vietnam and one from Thailand. So Elizabeth, we'll turn it over to you.
All right. Let's talk. Yay. It's an anxiety moment. Will the technology work? So I'm so happy to be here tonight. I'm so glad to see such a great turnout. Thanks for taking the time. We know you're busy. So this is we wanted to start the project by trying to figure out roughly what is the current condition of housing availability, cost, those sorts of things in the towns, and then do some projections for how that might play out over the next 20 years. And so that's the part that I'm going to present today. And then we use that information to do some mapping to just try and see, is this even feasible? And I'll talk about that second. Yep. I think you just... Oh, sorry. It's okay. Uh-oh. It's okay. Oh, it's kind of small print up there. I'm sorry. So this is just pretty much the same thing that Wayne just said. Okay, we did this housing needs assessment in a written report, and we're doing the workshop this week. All you guys are at, and we'll continue on Thursday, and then eventually there'll be a written report. That's the basic process. Okay.
Hey Elizabeth, would you like us to move the screen further up to make it a little bigger? Would that be helpful, or do you want us to keep on rolling?
I think that we should keep on rolling at this point. Sorry, just a second. Sure. Okay, so we'll just talk about demographics for a minute. So currently in the four-town region, there's about 1,900 households. That's not the population, right? That's the number of like individual family units, which could be a one-person family, but it's the number of households. We looked at the population trends from 2010 to 2020. We actually tried this 2010 to 2022, but COVID really made it very complicated. So we just used 2010 to 2020, and then we guessed that there's at least some unmet need of your kids, neighbors, and friends who would like to move here but can't. And so we projected that out at just a 1% increase per year over that roughly 20-year period. And what that comes out with is a suggestion that by 2040, about 2,700 people, 2,700 households would like to live here, which is about 850 new units. It's a growth rate of less than 1% per year, so it's not drastic change that we're talking about, but it adds up. It's significant over time. And so what that looks like, if you're a graph person, you are. Some people are, some people aren't. These are the sort of trends for the four towns. Londonderry has the most population to start with and had a little more growth from 2010 to 2020, so theirs goes up a little more. It's sort of the same for Winhall and the other ones. So you can see we're projecting this sort of steady progression. An important point in this, you guys know this, I was kind of gobsmacked, to tell you the truth, at the percentage of units that are in short-term rental or second homes. In Winhall, for instance, a whole lot of the available of the units are actually second homes. And it's very significant in the other towns as well, as you can see. So if you wonder why do we have all these houses and no place for people to move, I'm not saying Airbnbs are bad. That is not my point. It's like, let's be aware what the landscape is so that we can think about how they fit in, because we know that they also provide important support for some people who just, like, anyway, you understand what I'm saying. But there are a lot. And another point that we really want to make is, I think everybody in here probably knows that housing is unaffordable if you haven't been in your house for a long time. I'm so grateful that I bought my house a long time ago. I could never buy my house now. And I think it's even worse around here. So like in Windham County overall, there's been a 150% increase in the unhoused population in the 13-year period, which is a lot. So what that graph on the left is showing you, because you probably can't read it, is the percentage of people, on the far left is the percentage of people paying between 30 and 50% of their income. And the orange are renters and the gray are owners. And then of those, the next one is people who are paying more than 50% of their household income for housing. And so the number for the 30 to 49% is 40% of people. And the number for 50% or more is 35%. It's really, like, there's a serious housing cost problem that needs to be thought about. The one on the right shows the different towns. It's Winhall at the top, then Weston, Londonderry, and Jamaica. And like Jamaica goes up to 30%. Those are the percentage of households in Jamaica who earn less than $50,000 a year. And so you get a sense, in Winhall, it almost reaches 40%. It's a challenge, right? It's a challenge. In addition, the population, like, we're all getting older year by year, but overall there are more people who are older in the population than there used to be in all of the towns, except for Winhall, which has sort of bucked the trend, which is really interesting. But in Jamaica, for instance, 2010, 12% of the population was over 65. By 2022, that was 24% quarter of the people in town are over 65. 24% for Londonderry, 38% by Weston. I mean, they're holding steady, but it's a very significant percentage. The one on the right shows for the overall county what we would think of as an age pyramid. In the old days, it was shaped like a pyramid, but it's not anymore. I don't know what to call it.
Can I ask you a question about that? Use Jamaica as an example. You're showing 12% and then 24%. Is that a suggestion that 24% of the aging population has increased because they've moved into Jamaica?
No.
Or is that a suggestion that the younger are moving out?
Yes,
And that's reflected in here?
that's what I think. It's mostly people aging in place.
Yeah.
And there's just nowhere for young people to move into. I think it's what's going on. I think it's clearly families would love to live here. It's a fantastic place. And I think many of you have kids who would like to live here if they could.
I saw a history show on Vermont, and this goes back to the 1850s, of young people moving away from Vermont and the state trying to find ways to get them to come back.
Yeah.
So it's a long-standing problem.
It is. It's not important here, but I used to live in Iowa. And in Iowa, like all the kids I taught wanted to be farmers, but they were waiting not just for their fathers to retire, but for their grandfathers to retire first before they would get the farm. And so they had like 30 years to wait until they would get their farm. Yeah. So this is just like a few quick snapshots. And the messages that I'm hoping you're picking up is that there's a clear need for year-round housing. That there's a lot of opportunity in developing housing that will be attractive to people who have been aging in place but maybe would rather stay in town but not in their hard to maintain large house anymore, or they may need more services. And, that provides an opportunity for other people to move in if we can find places where seniors would like to move, not where they would say we have to move, but that they would like to move. That might look like low maintenance condos, smaller accessible houses, and that really there's a pretty big need for this affordable workforce housing. I didn't put it on any slides, but a thing we've heard over and over again is that businesses are having a hard time housing their workers, and that is impeding their ability to run their businesses. So it has all these sort of knock-on effects. So, any questions so far? Any other questions? Cool. Okay, do you want to look at some maps really quickly? So we just wanted to see, these maps are going to go, don't start thinking, that's my house. Because we know that these maps are not right. This is just some basic.
Before you get to the map, can you say one thing about what this also implies for house size?
Yeah, so.
Unit size?
So the number of houses you need is a factor of how many people total, and then how many people are living together in a house, right? And so as the number of people who live together in a house becomes smaller, you need more units, even if your population doesn't change, right? And one of the things about aging households is we tend to get smaller households as we age. Not always, but on average. And in general, household size is getting smaller. So even if the population didn't shift, we would actually need more units. Does that make sense to you? Yeah. So that's an ongoing trend. That's true for the whole United States, that our household sizes were getting smaller. They actually got bigger during COVID. That was part of what the road projections off if we tried to include COVID. But so that might be a great thing. Like my daughter's home, it's a blessing, and sometimes I wish she would.
One other thing.
Let's go with the blessing.
If I can add to it, one other thing to think about then is, I think a lot of people's, because how we grew up or how we've been living, the assumption is it's a single-family detached home on a large lot on a Class 3 town road, right? That's probably not the future of housing. It's certainly not the future of what local Vermonters can afford. That's going to be probably upwards of $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 now. And without a collapse in land prices, building prices, some massive collapse and creating a massive housing surplus. That's our reality. So we really are probably thinking more now about multifamily being the standard, or smaller units occupying less land. So just, I wanted to throw that out. Is that probably the direction that we're headed in? I know there's been a lot of discussion around, I'm not getting into the whole Act 250 and all that stuff, but about like conserving land versus building housing. I don't think that's really the issue. The issue is, where do we build the significant number of units of homes that's small enough and at a scale that construction costs are lower, labor costs are lower, land costs are lower, permitting costs are lower. Then the other benefits that accrue is energy is less, because maybe you have a shared wall. You have more walkable, bikeable places. And so I just want to throw that out as it may not be the pattern of development that we've tended to see here. It's probably going to look very different than what we've been accustomed to. If you think about it, our villages have always been home to these places. That's where the boarding houses were. That's where even the house that my wife and I had in Newfane Village looked like just one of the typical Greek revival houses, but that was turned into a boarding house for most of the year. The people lived in the kitchen. And so our villages have always kind of been home to multifamily housing. It may not have looked like what modern multifamily is looking like. But I just wanted to throw that out just to get you thinking also about what does our housing future look like, because it may be different than our existing context.
That's a great point. I would also think about that as having a choice.
Yeah.
You know, maybe you want to stay in a single family house, maybe you don't. Then you have a choice. All right. So this is the land suitability, but we wanted to see whether there was land that was actually suitable for development to start with. And so we thought about this a lot of different ways. We finally decided that if we did a calculation using roughly 4 units an acre, which is either small lots, or you could do multifamily with conservation land around it, or however that works out, but just on average as a number to work with. When we look at it that way, based on our projections for how much housing is needed, here's the number of acres that are actually needed, that first yellow column. It's not as bad as it seems, really. It's like 34 acres for Jamaica over 20 years, 16 years. 66 acres in Londonderry, 25 in Weston, 88 in Winhall. And so we looked at the maps, and I'll show you the maps, but we basically looked at the maps and we tried to figure out what land is absolutely not buildable. And then we tried to pick out the land that looked to us, just based on our mapping, to be the best. And it was not that difficult to find land that, at least on first glance, is appropriate. So that's what that last column is land that we were able to go like, we think this land might potentially be buildable. Got to figure out if that's really true, and so, I don't want to take too much. Should I stop here?
I just have a question. Was that privately held land or publicly owned land?
Scroll up. So the first thing we did was we got rid of land that wasn't suitable, and I'll answer your question in just a second. Land that was steep, land that was under conservation, prime soils, floodable land, basically. So we took all of those off the books. And yeah, let's go on. And then we looked for land that was near the road infrastructure, land that was close to village centers, because ideally it's better for making a lively place to live. And then land which could potentially connect with the Stratton Mountain sewer line. And so we didn't look at underlying ownership other than we took out federal land and state land and actually town land. But it turns out that town land might actually want to come back in as we get farther along. So I'm going to show you some maps. Basically, the things that are white is what, based on our mapping, is not really buildable. It's too steep, it's already built, it's sort of otherwise not good. And then gray is conserved land, so that's also not buildable. You'll see a lot of blue, those are the river corridors. And then orange is what seemed most suitable. on our first glance, again, like I said, don't get upset about what's in there. I just want to give you a sense of what it looks like. And so this is in Jamaica Village Center. There's some parcels that we think are worth looking at. Let's keep going. I want to be sure we get time for conversation. And then over on the other end near Stratton, there's some more parcels that are worth looking at. In Londonderry, the village centers actually seem to have land, which is very interesting. And some of this is not in practice, once we get down to the details, going to be buildable. We know that. So this is just sort of a big picture of what's potentially possible. And then in South Londonderry, there's also some land that might be buildable. Weston appears on our analysis to be more constrained. But we did find some parcels near the village center that, again, we would have to be sure this was true, but they look good on mapping. And Winhall, sort of the same. So the important point here is that it's not an impossible task. It's not that much land, and there actually is some land to build on that we can do, and we'll pick that will emerge as we go forward. We did not look at underlying zoning, just because we wanted to, it wasn't kind of worth the time, frankly, until we figured out which parcels were really the most important. And we also didn't account for sanitary and water systems, which is another issue in these initial maps. So that's my presentation. One last slide.
One last thing I would mention about Jamaica, they also looked at land in Rawsonville.
Yeah. Didn't want to bore you with too many minutes. Other questions? All right, thank you.
So I'll just add, the biggest takeaway I get from her presentation is that it's going to get worse before it gets better, right? And so a lot of us live in homes that we couldn't afford. I watched out of amusement the price of the house I used to own in Montpelier. And after a lifetime savings, I could probably still buy it, but like you'd think after 35 years in the housing market, I could trade up, and I moved to Montpelier, I'd move back to exactly the same house I had before. And that's, for a lot of us, we couldn't afford it. So it gets worse, and that's the whole point of this, is what can we do? Because it doesn't have to get worse in the process. There are opportunities. So we're going to spend the rest of the time want to hear from you. So we're going to divide you up more or less down the middle. You don't have to divide it in half. And half you should go to that board with the yellow, and half to that one over there. We want to, you can bring a chair with you. We want to do small groups so we can really do in more detail and get you all to participate. So we're going to do this for, 20, 25 minutes, and then we're going to reconvene just to see what the messages are and then let you out of here. So, take it away. And you guys can divide up however you want. Yeah, you guys. I wasn't sure.
Transportation is a big issue. It's a regional issue. It's a problem trying to address housing needs when you don't have fundamental transportation system of some type to support people. The ski industry is ever present. I think you called it the elephant in the room. So there's sort of the how do we take advantage of or deal with that when that is creating such an issue around access to housing and demand for particular types of housing. And then there's a disconnect between the housing market and the labor market. So what people can earn in wages and availability of jobs is not the same as what housing costs here. So those were the 5 big things that we heard.
Can I ask a quick clarifying question? On the snow item, are you talking about the recently, we have this trend towards more destructive snows than what we used to have? Or are you talking, can you say a little bit more about what you mean?
The difficulty about
we have been having these deeper, heavier snows, but also it's harder on the houses, harder on your land,
The climate itself.
Yeah.
Because we are having a transition, as opposed to the nice cold light snows,
Yeah.
we're getting this mortar dumps that are
Yep.
putting in power and trees and everything else. That's why I was curious. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Peter?
Where's our list? Here. So we had an interesting range of people in our group. I imagine you did as well, but everybody, some folks who had inherited a family home and lived here forever, other folks who have moved to the area and own a home but are now worried about how you maintain it and heat it and really looking for a place to downsize to. And then folks that are just starting out and can't afford to buy a home. So I think we've really received a fire hose of information all day today, and we've continued to hear a lot of similar stuff tonight. Some of the top takeaways, housing should fit into the natural environment. So kind of Anna was encouraging really having a strong vision of what we want housing to be, not if I could make words in your mouth, not just housing that we build because we have to, but housing that actually enhances our communities, including fitting in, doing a better job of using local materials, being energy efficient, so on. Another one we talked about is sort of this dynamic of it's hard to get into a house, it's also hard to get out of the house. So how do we ease the transition for people who have lived long-term on a property and are looking to downsize, and flip for people who are looking to get into a property? And the need for more transportation choices and being able to accommodate walkability and bikeability, which is a particular challenge, which we also talked about a lot when people don't really support changing the character of streets by building sidewalks. And how do you bring bikes into an area where you have these narrow two-lane roads and you have some wonderful new bike trails under construction, but how do you get there? And then I think a strong takeaway was how do you, again, build a sense of community and blend into the existing sense of community and the character of place, which may, even while you're requiring or needing to build different forms of housing in terms of density perhaps, in order to achieve affordability. But how do you do that without changing the sense of place and also building a community that makes up for the fact that maybe you're losing your big house and your 5 acres, but you're moving to a small place, but you still have a garden and you maybe have a better sense of connection to what's around you. And then energy efficiency being a really important part, not just of doing our part globally, but also making housing more affordable long-term so that people who either buy a house or are renting aren't hit with big housing costs.
I think connectivity was a key word on a lot of these subjects. Connecting to nature, connecting to neighbors, connecting to the possibility of choice, and I think also the connecting key places in the community, which implies, I think, and we heard this in different forms, a kind of prioritization of the things that you would look to begin for the first sets of connections and seeing how those things might be done. We also had some, I think, interesting input about what we call things is important, and being careful about the images that spring to mind that perhaps are not rural in the way we associate things. So one of our challenges and I think opportunities will be to think about how do we meet those things that you've said are important, but do it in ways that looks like, feels like, belongs in a village.
Can I just share one quote that I really loved? Sorry, but the main point is the speaker said, I like to think about people in 2040 saying thank you to people in 2024 for having solved this problem.
So let me follow up to the last question, if you will, which is, so you are going to go back to your communities, we're going to issue our report. What should you all be doing in the next 6 months to a year to start building momentum? What can you do in the next 6 months? Because some of these are very long solutions, 2040. But what can you do in the next year? Because it takes a series of steps to get. Thoughts, anybody?
Well, with our South Londonderry committee, it's going to be very short-lived. I mean, the engineers will come up with options and we'll vote on it as a committee and send it to the select board. But my hope is that we'll continue to meet somehow and keep it moving. I was on an energy committee. We enhanced the the town plan with energy and came up with all these ideas. And I said, let's look at the ideas and move on them. And, you know, we lost our chair, we lost another guy, we lost the committee. And so I'm trying to avoid losing momentum. And so the same thing with this, somehow we got to keep the momentum going.
Absolutely. Yes.
It's really important to talk about it with your friends, with your families, with your community members, at your meetings, because I think it's huge change for this area, and nobody likes just a brick wall to the face. And the more you ease into these kinds of conversations and gain understandings with people who maybe don't want sidewalks or don't want developments, and understand where they're coming from, and they can understand where you're coming from and why it's important, and I think that like what's in it for me can start to happen immediately. And these things are going to take time. It always takes time to do something like this, so we can all like talk about it at dinner with whoever.
Yeah, the change takes a big consensus. It's really easy to stop change. It's hard to get it. So building a consensus is important. What else?
I'm on the Londonderry Housing Commission, and being in real estate and having access to all kinds of data, I'm curious to take a closer look at the map for Londonderry and see if that, because I was working indirectly with the South Londonderry re-envisioning and trying to better identify parcels and see, besides just land, you know, what might be derelict, what might be a foreclosure, what are the possibilities. We don't have the money to buy anything right now, but just help to create a database that could help with that.
That's a good idea. What else?
I'm from Windham, not from the Four Cities, but we're doing a community needs assessment and a master plan of our town facilities, which would be like 5 buildings, so it's not huge. And with the idea that housing will be a thread in the overall tapestry of our, but it's one that has had, it'll be very interesting to see how it comes up, because it's been sometimes hidden and sometimes with a spotlight on it. So, but I think keeping that momentum going by engaging the community in looking at all the needs. So these transportation, they'd all be able to be articulated.
Okay. I like that housing as a thread. Other thoughts?
I love the notion of a tapestry. Really wonderful.
Wayne, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
I'm curious, like as you guys were discussing in groups, one of the issues that we don't do nearly enough work on as a regional commission is, it relates to how we live and where we live, is isolation of people on both ends of the spectrum, both youth isolation and senior isolation, and how that relates to mental health, just mental well-being, and I think further exacerbated by the flood trauma. You guys are here, you're able to be here, you're probably generally able to interact with people if you want to, but has this come up in town discussions at all? I mean, I know towns generally, there's not a whole lot you can do about these issues, but especially like related to where people live and how we live, has this been coming up?
I was going to bring this up anyway, and it relates to your question sort of indirectly, that Neighborhood Connections did a survey, and what was needed was transportation. We do not have public transportation. What it is, it's very limited, especially in Londonderry. And so they created a transportation unit, and now it's like 4 or 5 paid drivers and volunteer drivers. I'm a volunteer driver. I didn't want the commitment of being that. And so I bring people to Springfield, New Hampshire, sometimes just to the Mountain Valley Clinic, meet all sorts of people, making connections with people I would never meet. made friends with somebody who's like politically opposite from me, I think, but we're still good friends. So that's one way to do it.
I think I saw one of the most beautiful things when COVID happened was the select board, chief of police, the town clerk, a group of people were identifying in Winhall anyone who could possibly be food insecure or lived alone or, you know, just whatever kind of situation. And there were people kind of just keeping eyes on people. And I think those are the kind of communities we have. And so I think there is an opportunity to keep eyes, you know, like there are a lot of people who really care here.
But one of the things I would encourage you to do is that you can do starting tomorrow is especially with like your existing village contexts, right? Because those are your existing civic, social, commercial centers. Think about what role those places can play in bringing people together more often and in different ways. I mean, of course, there's the regular commerce of going to the post office and other things, but think about the assets that you've already got, how you can harness those assets more to try to bring people together more. And the other thing I'll just throw out there is there an opportunity to do things more town to town? So in other words, not just Weston in isolation of Jamaica, in isolation of Winhall, in isolation of Londonderry, but are there things that you could even look at doing to bring people together on a town-to-town-to-town basis? Because that's a huge issue, as you guys know. It's leading to just all kinds of mental health issues, and it does go, I mean, you're talking about transportation, but part of that transportation issue relates to how we live and where we live, right? We're spread all over the place. And so as you're thinking forward, like to 2040, how do we bring more people together so that when you're picking up somebody from daycare and going to the post office, you can stop by the store and there's something going on in the village green and these other things, kind of the way we used to live, I think, more naturally. And by naturally, I just mean, right, we went to places to do things as opposed to ordering things remotely and that kind of stuff. But anyway, I don't mean to go too deep into that, but I think it is something that, it's not a select board thing, it's not a planning commission thing, but it could be a non-government, it doesn't even have to be like a formally organized organization, but just think about how do you harness those resources you've got, because that's one of the things that I know Londonderry really focused on after the flooding was how do we create greater resilience of relationships among people to bounce back faster when you have something like a flood or a pandemic or a long outage due to trees on down on power lines, other things like that. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
That's great. Any final clarifying questions?
I don't have a question. Just wanted to build on what you're talking about in terms of, community. Several years ago, I saw a documentary about a housing community. I think it was in Denmark. And I've been obsessed about the way that they built this community because I think it's something that should be scalable. It should be done everywhere. But it was a community where there was housing for both young families just starting out and senior citizens. And then there was like a central community center. Right. And people could stay home and cook dinner in their own kitchen for themselves, but there were also communal meals in the community center. But the biggest takeaway for me was that for the older people, there was a sense of usefulness because they would, like the kids coming home from school in the middle of the afternoon while their parents were still at work, well, the young families would befriend the older citizens of the community who could then, meet the kids coming off the bus and spend time with them, and then spend time together with the younger families, and it just...
Sounds like co-housing.
It is. It's co-housing.
Yeah, I guess...
Okay. It's sort of the Scandinavian theme in
Right,
this country.
right,
But
right.
there are a lot of co-housing projects in New England.
Yep. But thinking that way in terms of building a small clustered community.
A couple quick things. What George said reminded me of a show I saw about mental health where I think it was Denmark also, where instead of sending them to an institution or just a therapist or something, the whole family, community would get together and figure out how to support that person. And the other idea had, somebody just mentioned the other day of, like we have town hall in Londonderry, having a monthly talent show and bring people together.
That would be fun.
Any last questions or comments from the team? All right, so we just do a random door prize. So we have a $50 certificate. It's to Walmart, which I know is not exactly encouraging local things, but it's what I have.
Yeah.
So we're randomly choosing someone who gets
It's the
this.
same method every time.
They have to be
Totally
here.
random. Yes, you have to be here to receive your prize. Okay, Kathy fails. That's what I thought.
Hey, very good. Well, my group.
Yeah, I have those. I already rolled.
Okay. All right, thank you all for coming. I hope you come back on Thursday night at 6 o'clock right here.
And bring a friend,
Bring
family.
a friend, yes. Many friends.
Select board.